So, as we know, Kevin McCarthy has been made speaker, but the Freedom Caucus did not allow him to become speaker without getting some type of concessions from him. So we've been talking about this all week, basically. And you can't help but look at it and wonder what the squad could have gotten from people like Nancy Pelosi and now Hakeem Jeffries. What they could have gotten for all of us, not just committee assignments for themselves. Now, I'm not a fan of Matt Gaetz, but there's something he says in this video that I feel is spot on. Spot on. Look at what he was asking. Listen to this. Now, this was shared by Matthew Kobach. You can agree with people you disagree with. I dare you to disagree with anything said in this video. Let's see what Matt Gaetz said here.
I believe that no member of Congress, by House rule, should be allowed to accept a donation for their campaign from a federal lobbyist or a federal political action committee. That money all has strings attached to it, and anybody who tries to tell you otherwise is lying. And when members take hundreds of thousands of dollars from lobbyists and PACs, they work for them more than they work for their constituents. And guess what? I intend to offer that amendment on the House floor in January, and I already have Democrats ready to vote for it, maybe even all of them. The second thing I would suggest is that if someone is a member of Congress, they should be prohibited from lobbying for life. Why is it so hard to say that you should choose one side or the other to be on? You're either in the law-making game or you're in the influence peddling game. And those who choose to be in the influence peddling game, go ahead, but you should sacrifice that when you get the privilege to represent 750,000 people. I intend to offer that amendment on January 3rd, and I expect that there will be Democrats voting for it. I will also introduce an amendment to have a ban on members of Congress trading individual stocks. How can we say that that is not something that dilutes our trust in markets and in governance when people are essentially able to bet on the outcomes that they have an ability to somewhat control? And I expect Democrats to vote for that. And finally, I would observe something that has really worked well in the state of Florida, a single subject rule. A bill coming to the floor should only deal with one subject. I was incensed as a freshman when I had to vote on the farm bill and whether or not to authorize war in Yemen in the same vote. And we can still have broad bills that relate to insurance or education or appropriations, but the notion that we lash all these things together does not serve our constituents and the American people. And I would expect, if we're in the majority, Democrats will vote for my amendment for a single subject rule.
These are policies and ideas that technically the squad should be championing. All of these things, all of them. Let's talk about some of these.
I believe that no member of Congress, by House rule, should be allowed to accept a donation for their campaign from a federal lobbyist or a federal political action committee.
Why would the left be opposed to something like that? I wouldn't be opposed to that. Shouldn't that message be coming from the squad members? Shouldn't AOC and them like champion? That makes a lot of sense to me. Let's listen to the next one. He goes on here.
That money all has strings attached to it, and anybody who tries to tell you otherwise is lying. And when members take hundreds of thousands of dollars from lobbyists and PACs, they work for them more than they work for their constituents.
Isn't that what we always say here? Isn't this what I always say on this channel and what I always say, we say on RBN as well? Not to take that money? Okay.
And guess what? I intend to offer that amendment on the House floor in January, and I already have Democrats ready to vote for it, maybe even all of them. The second thing I would suggest is that if someone is a member of Congress, they should be prohibited from lobbying for life. Why is it so hard to say that you should choose one side or the other to be on? You're either in the law-making game or you're in the influence peddling game. And those.
Why would you object to that? If you're on the left, why would you object to that? I agree. They shouldn't be able to lobby. Let's go on.
Who choose to be in the influence peddling game, go ahead, but you should sacrifice that when you get the privilege to represent 750,000 people. I intend to offer that amendment on January 3rd, and I expect that there will be Democrats voting for it. I will also introduce an amendment to have a ban on members of Congress trading individual stocks.
That one heavily for people who disagree that the squad should have forced the vote for Medicare for all, although I do not disagree with that. They could have added that concession because Nancy Pelosi loves to trade stocks. Why not put that forward? You see, like, this should be coming from the left.
How can we say that that is not something that dilutes our trust in markets and in governance when people are essentially able to bet on the outcomes that they have an ability to somewhat control? And I expect Democrats to vote for that. And finally, I would observe something that has really worked well in the state of Florida, a single subject rule. A bill coming to the floor should only deal with one subject.
Yes, and let me tell you why. See, I agree with that too. The reason why that should be the case is because oftentimes with these bills, there are multiple items in the bill. I've talked about this before when we went over how to read a bill on this show. There are multiple items. So if you agree with one item, you have to vote for the entire bill just to get that one item to pass. And I'll give an example with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders voted for the bill that included Joe Biden's crime bill. But the reason why Bernie Sanders voted for it was because that also included the Violence Against Women's Act. So how do you put violence against women and put it in a crime bill, which heavily was aimed at the African-American community? So what do? Because if you vote against the crime bill, now you just voted against the Women's Act. That's on purpose, by the way. I do not believe this is an accident. I believe this is done on purpose. So yes, I agree. Single subject bills. Stop throwing in bills that deal with funding to war. Stop throwing in items into these bills that deal with social justice issues, that deal with reproductive rights issues. Stop throwing those things and lumping it all in to a bill that has nothing to do with it. It's just ridiculous. You shouldn't even have to choose between the two, but those should be single bills. So I agree with that. Again, why isn't this coming from the left?
I was incensed as a freshman when I had to vote on the farm bill and whether or not to authorize war in Yemen in the same vote. And we could still have broad bills that relate to insurance or education or appropriations, but the notion that we lash all these things together does not serve our constituents and the American people. And I would expect, if we're in the majority, Democrats will vote for my amendment for a single subject rule.
The other problem that you have when you have those multiple items that is part of a bill, it makes these bills incredibly long. Like we talked about the other week, that $1.7 trillion bill that was approved, that was over 4,000 pages. You expect me to believe that all of those congressmen and women read over 4,000 pages that quickly, the same week the bill was introduced and passed in the same week? No, they didn't read through all of it. So again, you have congressmen and women signing on to bills that a lot of times you can't even read through the whole bill because you have all these different items. That message should be coming from the left. And what we've seen over the past week or so is that we have seen that members of the Freedom Caucus, so to speak, seem to have the balls and the gusto to fight back and push back the way that these Justice Democrats were sent to DC to do. That was their task. The whole point of Justice Democrats was to go in and take over the Democratic Party and to push back against these corporate Democrats and to push those progressive policies and get those policies through. They have not done that. They've had several years now. It's not like they just joined last year. And what we've seen them do is just go along with the corporate Democrats. They got comfortable. They're making six-figure salaries. And by the way, that starts your first year. They're paid. They're writing books. They have speaking engagements that they're paid for. They're making money now. So they just fall in line. And that takes us back to forcing the vote. And this is going to all go into the Ralph Nader suggestion here. Because now even Jacobin is admitting that the force the vote should have happened. Even Jacobin, which I consider to be not necessarily far left, so to speak. I consider Jacobin to be part of that PMC DSA crowd, a social group. Even they, who were heavily against force the vote, I believe it was Ben Burgess who wrote against force the vote, even now they are saying that the right played hardball in Congress and the left should take notes. This is coming from Jacobin. So let's go on. Let's see what they said here. Not going to read the entire article here, but there are some good things to point out. Here we go. There is no reason why good cannot triumph as often as evil. That's coming from Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote The Sirens of Titan. The triumph of anything is a matter of organization. If there are such things as angels, I hope that they are organized along the lines of the mafia. Something similar can be said about the American left. Democratic socialists fight for universal health care and end to the climate catastrophe and mass incarceration and economic democracy. But if we're going to triumph over the forces of reaction and win these changes and more, we're going to need to learn to fight harder and smarter. Today, that means taking a page from the American political equivalent of the mafia, the right wing of the Republican Party. In the last week, where the Republican right fought Kevin McCarthy's bid to become Speaker of the House and showed everyone how to play political hardball to build power. The left, with growing socialist caucuses at the state level and a growing bench of progressive representatives in DC, need to learn some lessons. You see this? Even they're calling it out. What the right won. McCarthy has been at the head of the Republican House caucus since 2019. In any other ordinary year, the position of the Speaker of the House would have been his almost automatically following the Republicans' narrow victory in last year's midterm election. But a small group on the party's right wing turned a coronation into a multi-round fight. Desperate for their support, McCarthy had to give on issue after issue. McCarthy folded early on policy questions. He fought against the 2022 lame duck spending bill, a core right-wing priority. He called for the resignation or impeachment of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, a target of the right's ear. McCarthy also agreed to create a new subcommittee in the House Judiciary Committee to investigate the weaponization of the federal government by the Biden administration and the FBI and the CIA. More significant in the long term, he also agreed to rules changes and committee assignments that will dramatically strengthen the right's hand. Let me tell you one of the things that they were asking for as well. They were asking for McCarthy not to be able to make this a rule, not to be able to put up super PAC money against GOP primary races in the open races. Now, why would that be important to someone on the left? Because let's remember, that's exactly what happened to Nina Turner. Nina Turner, who was leading in the polls, Nina Turner was hit the week of the election with big money coming from AIPAC, coming from these super PACs. This is something else that the left could have also asked for from Nancy Pelosi and from Hakeem Jeffries. Because let's be real, they didn't ask Hakeem Jeffries for these types of concessions either. Hakeem Jeffries is against Green New Deal. He's against Medicare for all. He agrees with expanding Obamacare, but he is against Medicare for all. Why didn't they try to get Hakeem Jeffries to even come around on those two issues? If you don't support Medicare for all, let's pivot to the Green New Deal issue, the climate catastrophe. We don't have time to sit around and wait and twiddle our thumbs. The fact that you have someone like Hakeem Jeffries, who is a part of the Progressive Caucus, and he does not agree with a Green New Deal or Medicare for all, first of all, he should not be a part of that caucus. And second of all, how dare they? How dare they vote for him without asking him to bend on those two issues? Let's go on. This part here. Most significantly, he agreed to bring back the motion to vacate the chair, which will allow just one Republican to call for a snap vote to remove the speaker. This is a rule that the right wing previously used to remove John Bonner. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a leading conspiracy theorist from the Republican fringe, extracted a much sought after seat on the House Oversight Committee for McCarthy in return for her support. There will now be an investigation of the House Select Committee on the January riots, another right-wing priority. And McCarthy agreed to hobble the work of the Office of Congressional Ethics and make it harder for the office to hire investigators, a move the right hopes will gum up further investigations into what happened on January. Most of these concessions granted to the right are detestable. A few, like new investigations into operations of the FBI and the CIA, or restraining the ability of the party leadership to campaign in primaries, might be appealing to the left. Again, this is coming from Jacobin, the PMC DSA crowd. But either way, the fact that the right was able to stack up so many wins reflects its cunning use of hardball tactics that advance its agenda. I want to go into what Ralph Nader is suggesting the squad to do, because I think this is really important. He gave a whole outline, and we got to recognize this. I don't care who you like. I don't care if you don't like Jimmy Dore. People keep bringing his name up. I don't care. You cannot sit here and dispute the fact that they didn't get some type of gain for refusing to vote for Kevin McCarthy unless he gave them some type of concessions, whether they're on the right or so have it. It does not matter. The point is, the Freedom Caucus used their numbers and they used their leverage to get something in return for their vote. And they were not even willing to budge until they kept adding concessions, saying, give me more, give me more. They weren't willing to budge until they got what they wanted. And that is exactly what the Justice Democrats were supposed to do. They were supposed to go there and push back against the establishment and to take over the Democratic Party. And you cannot and you will not take over the Democratic Party if you fall in line. Period. Now, what did Ralph Nader say? Because Ralph, he comes back with some recommendations here. Ralph Nader, will Congressional Progressive Caucus ever draw a red line? This is huge. Until the quieted progressives form their own voting bloc, the national citizen groups will remain as powerless as the dominant corporate Democrats in Congress want them to be. This article came out yesterday. Now, this is a follow-up to a previous article. What follows is an encore from a column I wrote in 2018 for the new progressive Democrats elected to the House of Representatives. The Democratic Party won control of the House in 2018 and again barely in 2020. There was no response nor adoption of any of these power enhancing suggestions from any of the novice legislatures in the 2 election cycles. I am now sending to the entire class of 2022 these helpful tools to strengthen both their efforts and those of the citizen groups in the halls of Congress. For those just joining, again, this is coming from Ralph Nader. The rapidity with which the Democratic Party's political cocoon wraps itself around newly elected legislators who arrive in Washington determined to change the culture and output of our premier branch of government is beyond astonishing. Unlike the red line drawing so-called Freedom Caucus among the House Republicans who topple their leadership or at least are power factors, the Democrats toe the line and surrender to their dictatorial leadership. Until the quieted progressives form their own voting bloc, the national citizens groups will remain as powerless as the dominant corporate Democrats in Congress want them to be. We shall know who, if any, of the progressives in the class of 2022 are serious about their pre-swearing in determinations and strive to measure up to the yardsticks for empowerment. Now, let's go to his suggestions. He goes on to say, progressives must, number one, vigorously confront all the devious ways that congressional bosses have developed to obstruct the orderly, open, accessible avenues for duly elected progressive candidates to be heard and to participate in congressional deliberations from the subcommittees to the committees to the floor of the House. Otherwise, the constricting congressional cocoon will quickly envelop and smother their collective energies and force them to get along by going along. That's number one. That's the first suggestion that he mentions there. Number two, organize themselves into an effective caucus, unlike the anemic progressive caucus. They will need to be constantly in touch with each other and work to democratize Congress and substantially increase the quality and quantity of its legislative oversight output. That means this. When Cori Bush made that statement where she said, "We vote alone. We vote as individuals," Ralph is telling you, you need to stop doing that. Because it seems like to me, the squad only comes together when they're going to take selfies. If you're not acting as a block, there's really no point of you being there. There really isn't. Number three, connect with the national citizen organizations that have backers all around the country and knowledgeable staff who can help shape policy and mobilize citizen support. This is crucial to backstop the major initiatives these newbies say they want to advance. Incumbent progressives operate largely on their own and too rarely sponsor civic meetings on Capitol Hill to solicit ideas from civic groups. Incumbent progressives in both the House and the Senate do not like to be pressed beyond their comfort zone to issue public statements, to introduce tough new bills, or even to conduct or demand public hearings. Long story short, they need to engage with the public more, actively engage with the public instead of running away from them. They need to be reaching out to some of these local DSA chapters, since a lot of them are part of DSA, and organizing with them. They need to hear from the public. 4, develop an empowerment agenda that shifts power from the few to the many, from the plutocrats and corporatists to consumers, workers, patients, small taxpayers, voters, community groups, the wrongfully injured, shareholders, consumer cooperatives, and trade unions. Shift of power, facilities, and rights. Remedies cost very little to enact because their implementation is in the direct hands of those empowered. to organize, to advocate, to litigate, to negotiate, and to become self-reliant for food, shelter, and services. Citizen utility boards provide an example of what can come from empowering citizens. Again, they have to work with people in the community. They have shielded themselves off from the community, from the public, from independent media. They have to work within the community. Let's go on. 5, encourage citizens back home to have their own town meetings, some of which the new lawmakers would attend. Imagine the benefits of using town meetings to jumpstart an empowerment agenda and to promote long overdue advances such as the living wage, universal health care, corporate crime enforcement, accountable government writ large, renewable energy, and real tax reform. And when they have these town meetings, and they should attend, don't charge your constituents to come to the meeting. Because that's happened here. Because there's been events and town meetings that some of them have done here, and they charge tickets for it. People already gave you their vote, and you haven't given them anything in return. How dare you charge money for them to come and see you? Let's go on. 6, regularly publicize the horrendously cruel and wasteful Republican votes. This seems obvious, but amazingly, it isn't something Democratic leaders are inclined to do. Last June, I urged senior Democrats in the House to publicize a list of the most anti-people, pro-Wall Street, and pro-war legislation that the Republicans, often without any hearings, rammed through the House. The senior Democrats never did this, even though the cruel GOP votes against children, women, health, safety, access to justice, etc., would be opposed by more than 3 out of 4 voters. I have to disagree with him a little bit here, because when it comes to these pro-war legislation, that has not just come from the GOP, that has also come from the Democratic Party. So I have to disagree with him on that part there. Number 7, disclose attempts by pro-corporate, anti-democratic, or anti-human rights and other corrosive lobbies that try to use campaign money or political pressure to advance the interest of the few to the detriment of the many. Doing this publicly would deter lobbies from even trying to twist their arms. In other words, call out corporate interest. All of them. Especially, these are politicians, the squad members, these are politicians. They're not taking money from these health insurance companies. Call them out. Call out the lobbyist. Next, 8, refuse PAC donations and keep building a base of small donations as Bernie Sanders did in 2016. This will relieve new members of receiving undue demands for reciprocity and unseemly attendance at corrupt PAC parties in Washington, D.C. I have to address something here. There is a difference between super PAC and PAC, and some of the squad members do take PAC money. Now, that doesn't mean the PAC is corporate. Some of these PACs are not. For example, I think some of them, I have to look this back up, but some of them may take like PAC money from like a teachers union or something like that. So, or the firefighters, those could be PACs as well. But what he's saying here is that you shouldn't take those either. That's the thing. Let's go on. Seek whenever possible to build left-right coalitions on specific major issues in Congress and come back home that can become politically unstoppable. Seek whenever possible to build left-right coalitions on specific major issues in Congress and back home that can become politically unstoppable. One of them could be the anti-war movement. That's where they could build a left-right coalition. And the last one, demand wider access to members of Congress by the citizenry. Too few citizen leaders are being allowed to testify at fewer congressional hearings. Holding hearings is a key way to inform and galvanize public opinion. Citizen group participation in hearings has led to saving millions of lives and preventing countless injuries over the decade. Authentic congressional hearings lead to media coverage and help to mobilize the citizenry. Adopting these suggestions will liberate new members to challenge the taboos entrenched in Congress regarding the corporate crime wave, military budgets, foreign policy, massive corrupt warfare giveaways, and crony capitalism. Again, this is part 2, because he gave them a list of suggestions when they were first elected for those who ran in 2018. And from what I understand, they did not reach out to Ralph Nader. Final point. Measuring up to these civic yardsticks is important for the new members of the House of Representatives and for our democracy. See how they score in the coming months. Urge them to forward these makers of a Democratic legislator to the rest of the members of Congress, most of whom are in a rut or comfortable incumbency. I think Ralph is a little bit more hopeful than I am in reference to encouraging them and getting them on board, because they're long gone, especially the ones that were elected in the first round. That first group with AOC and Ilhan Omar, they're gone. Trying to reach them is going to be almost impossible now. Again, that article is called "Will Congressional Progressive Caucus Ever Draw a Red Line?" And I can answer that question for you, Ralph. I don't think so. Let me go to some of the comments here. JB says, leveraging your vote for concessions is called playing politics. And Jennifer says, my mom used to like Nader. Now she's a Republican. LOL. Wow. This piece here, I think, is important, because at some point they learned how to play by the rules. And I want to remind you of this article here from the New York Times. Now, this was written in 2020. How AOC learned how to play by Washington rules. I'm not going to read the entire article, but there's a certain part I want to highlight here. Correction, it was written in 2019, but it was updated in 2020. Less than 2 weeks after being sworn in last year, Representative AOC, a young progressive star fresh off an upset of one of the top Democratic leaders in the House, put her fellow Democrats on notice that she would soon be coming for them. And we all know what happened there. There were even whispers that she might try to oust Representative Hakeem Jeffries, of New York, a rising star regarded by many Democrats as a future speaker. But after nearly 9 months, with her eyes now wide open to the downsides of her revolutionary reputation and social media fame, AOC has tempered her brash institution be damned style with something different, a careful political calculus that adheres more closely to unwritten rules of Washington she once disdained. And I wanted to bring up this article again is because this is just a reminder, it only took 9 months. So for people asking, when did she change? 9 months later. And I want to highlight this piece here because this is important. Gone from her Washington office are her original chief of staff and her communications director, two Justice Democrats founders who were intent on waging their divisive brand of politics from their offices on Capitol Hill. Pay attention to the vocabulary, divisive. See how they paint a negative brush around it? It was divisive. No longer an unabashed ambassador of the combative group, AOC has carefully managed her involvement with it. Guys, this is the piece you need to take home. No longer an unabashed ambassador of the combative group, AOC has carefully managed her involvement with it. This article, again, was written in 2019. It was updated in 2020. So they were letting you know then she was no longer a part of the group. AOC and the squad never took Ralph Nader's advice. Never contacted Ralph Nader. I've had this discussion. So this is the second time Ralph Nader is giving them a list of suggestions that will help them. Don't know what else to say after that. I really don't. And thank you for the super chat, Lorez. Bargain for votes is democracy, not blindly go with party. So that's that.